Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. I'm James Gill.
And I'm Laura Stimson.
From the National Centre for Writing here at Dragon Hall in Norwich.
I work with Gill here at Dragon Hall, managing various writer development programmes. As part of the Early Career Awards, we regularly publish resource packs, which are bundles of advice, interviews, audio and video for writers to access for free. Each pack is on a theme. We have packs on beginnings, structure, plot, editing, world building and many more. And this podcast forms part of our new pack, which is all about love. It includes exercises, articles, and indeed this episode of The Writing Life, a discussion about writing love with Maddie Mortimer. Maddie is the author of Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies, which won her the 2022 Desmond Elliott Prize, which is the cornerstone of our Early Career Awards. The first part of our conversation was about the Desmond Elliott Prize win, but we soon started talking about the novel and writing craft, and about writing love in its many forms, from the intimate and tender to the physical and visceral, from romantic to the familial, and how religion also plays a part in the book's landscape.
There are more than 10 early career packs available on our website and all for free. Packs include guides, interviews, podcasts and videos, and the packs cover things like dialogue, research and endings, as well as those that Laura mentioned. Just head on over to the free resources section of our website. And so, without further delay, we join that conversation between Laura and Maddie.
What I find fascinating is everyone has a different, and I think theory is a good word, because I think that writers hold on to the way that they address their editorial, particularly as a kind of as something that's sort of instinctive, but also as something they've almost like built up. They've developed their theory over the course of years. So this will be, if you ask this writer about how they edit, it has to be this, and that is, the conclusion that they've come to is that this is the way, and it's fascinating because everybody has their own theory. And the idea that, for some writers that you would just write, get the story down on the page and then look at what you've got after 200 pages. It's like completely shocking, because because the idea of editing as you go along is such a different way of approaching it. But plenty of writers, that's how you have to work. Yeah. And then editing via theme or via through the lens of a particular character must bring another layer. So each time you're editing, you're basically adding a new layer of meaning to the story. I think, which is interesting. Now you have said that, because I think it reads, you can kind of feel that actually those layers, and I think the layers of particularly the family, the family at the core of the story, which of course goes back not just one but two generations. It feels in reading like you're kind of layering up your understanding of this family as you read, and you're not given everything all at once, obviously, and it's interesting because obviously it's a very non-linear book, I feel, as a reader, whereby the way that you've approached the writing in the first place is fragmentary. I wanted to ask if the novel started out as a novel, or whether it started out as something else, as pieces of writing or vignettes, or whether you always knew that you wanted to tell this story in fragments and then look really carefully at how they build.
I've always written kind of in fragments. I think it would have been too intimidating if I'd gone into this whole sort of project being like, this is going to be a novel. And so I think I began with lots of vignettes and characters. And weirdly, I was thinking about this the other day of like, where did it really start? Again, because I just have a very strange relationship with time, but in the same way that I'm like, I couldn't tell you how many drafts there are. I couldn't tell you when it really started, because there's so many parts of this book that felt like they've been kind of brewing and have been part of kind of my writing, I guess, for a really, really, really long time. Like almost like 10 years ago, like I found some sentences that I had in a note, that made their way into the book, that I wrote when I was like 17, and so there are I was like really, really, really early on, like even in university, I was writing all these little kind of fragmentary sort of prose poems about this boy on a bike called Red, who was,
Oh, wow. Okay.
like, just burning through this place, just like burning through this landscape. But I didn't know what Red was.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know what the landscape was. But I obviously went back and looked and thought, oh no, that's chemo, and this landscape is a body. And I also had lots of musings and memories that never made their way into the book, but now I recognize as Harry looking back on this woman, Leah, he was married to, who died too young, and he was in his like late 80s, and there was just lots of these memories of this woman, of this person, and again I wrote them at university, and I realize now, finding them and reading it, being like, God, that was Harry, that was Harry, and that was Leah.
So we just met that character at a different time in his life.
Exactly. Yeah. So weirdly, the first two characters I actually had of the entire book was Red, who isn't even really a character now. It's just sort of a form, a kind of symbol, and Harry, which just is so funny, you know, to think that those were the two little seeds, and through them, I ended up. But I guess that's also perhaps a good example of like how I didn't go in wanting to do anything too kind of like close or personal. I wanted to, like, you know, keep the book as this big kind of like fictional thing. So I think going, you know, starting in these kind of obscure kind of fragments made sense, you know.
Yeah. And you say that you feel, or like officially, you know, Red isn't character, but of course Red holds the attention of the book like a character, and kind of as a kind of a narrative force feels like another character in the book. Did you have a balance? Was there a balance of how much you wanted that voice to kind of take over, because you didn't want it to take over the lives of the living characters?
The first person, well, I didn't. No, yeah, so the eye, red is the chemo.
Sorry, I'm thinking back to the earlier analogy of your first forming of the idea of the character, and then the body as a separate.
Yes. Yeah, it wasn't there as a first person voice at all. It was it didn't exist. All of the stuff that existed inside the body was kind of third person, sort of traditional quest narrative of these forms moving about, and they were either destructive or healing. You know, kind of they impacted the landscape in like various destructive or healing ways. And they all kind of represented their different things, like, you know, the cancer or the chemotherapy or the daughter or the husband or whatever, and they were kind of and you kind of had to work out what was going on through the kind of allegory of it all. But it was just too obscure running alongside this family drama. It was almost like existing like a kind of never-ending story type. You know, it was like a fairy tale that kind of existed alongside. But it was all very obscure, and it felt quite remote, and like the registers were too similar, moving between like the third person of the story of a family, and then this kind of slightly more mythical, allegorical landscape. I knew that the thing that I wanted to really play with was voice, was this kind of this first person. And I've always been really, really tentative to write in first person. And so then knew that, you know, anything that you're tentative to do is probably the thing that you need to do, because there's a reason why you're scared of it or why you're shying away from it. It's probably the answer to all of your problems.
So you just inverted it and just decided that the I, but obviously the third person tells the story of all of the other characters in the book, but it's a very, very close third person. And I think the word that
I think of to describe the book, but also the experience of reading, is that it's about intimacy. So it's about the intimacy of the body. It's about the intimacy of the connected relationships between the family members, and heartbreakingly intimate. The always, I think, the relationship between mother and child, and looking how that relationship is kind of mirrored, but also affected and altered by the generation that came before and that relationship. But also what I really love, of course, because you can't avoid that this book is about the experience of cancer and chemo, and having your body having your body overtaken by something, a kind of malevolent host. What I love about the writing particularly is that it's very, very visceral and very sort of real and fleshy and raw and sort of disgusting and beautiful. And I get the impression that you really enjoy kind of choreographing the reality of bodies and how they move with each other as well. And there are some really lovely sex scenes, and for example, and so it's not just about the kind of the medical body, but also the kind of, I think choreography is the best word that I can find to describe the way that people move with each other as well. Is that something as a writer that you really love writing about?
Absolutely. I think the whole book is just really preoccupied with that the sort of contradiction between like who we are in outward facing sort of, in rooms, in kind of in all our kind of polite manner and our kind of daily domestic, selves, and who we really are in our like darkest moments. And I think it's the whole book's sort of constantly navigating that, or kind of playing with, who we really are and who we want to be. I think it was always going to be this very visceral, this very kind of raw, visceral thing, this fleshy thing. Partly because I was thinking so much about the inner workings of a body. And so, just even writing the inside of a body and all of the kind of the architecture, instantly in thinking that, in thinking about that and immersing yourself in that world, it kind of like seeped into the way that I saw the outside world too. So it was going between the two kind of writing styles of being interior and the exterior. The writing itself ended up sort of bleeding into one, and all of those boundaries sort of collapsed, and it made the whole thing very alive and kind of disgusting and pulsing, and thinking about just, like the marks that we make on our skin, and then thinking about it from the inside of a body is almost like that's what I'm always trying to do with writing, with the way that, language is perceived in the book, or an image or a metaphor. It's like you establish something, and then what does it look like on the reverse? And I think that's what I'm always trying to do. It's that constant turning something over, looking at it from the other side. And this thing that was very familiar and very normal to us is like actually uncanny and bizarre and unknowable, and that's the case for everything that we know and that we feel and that we that we touch, that there's this other life on the flip side, and I think that's what the book's kind of constantly trying to grapple with, or at least reveal, expose, or whatever.
It's really like a very pop culture reference here that springs to mind is that really cheesy 80s film In a Space, which makes me think of like inhabiting the insides of somebody's body, and the fact that we walk around living inside these bodies every day, and quite often we don't want to think about what's going on inside. But obviously the kind of there's a analogy there around the family as well as a kind of network, and like not wanting to think about what's going on the other side of this family member's external life, because obviously there are things around the expectation of your parent, and your parent being infallible, and your parent being good, and your parent being brave, and all of those things are exposed in the book, which, hearing you talk about that, makes me think of those sort of fallibilities of some of the characters in the books, some of the mistakes that they make, and how other members of the family would rather not know, because actually it's that exposing of all of the true grit of life that is obviously, quite frightening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's all of the characters are going through that, aren't they? There's like these constant kind of like dual tensions of and it's all kind of led by this dark, they all have this, I see all of the characters as having these quite dark impulses.
Okay.
That they're constantly trying to sort of fend off or generate in themselves. So like Harry is Leah, I consider her quite a dark character, because that's what the eye is. It's just sort of Leah's worst self. But Harry doesn't think about having, or at least, at the beginning of the book, doesn't think about having an affair, or doesn't think about kind of like the sexuality of existence as much as Leah would like him to. And so he's constantly throughout the whole book trying to draw that out of himself. He's trying to be a risk taker, trying to occupy a kind of more violent, supposedly masculine space that Leah perhaps has suggested that she'd like to see from him, because and Iris is the same. Iris just wants to be popular, and the reality is that she would like to be doing what Burn Girl's doing. She kind of wants to terrorize the school. She wants to have power, and she wants to be her best friend. She wants to be at the top. And so all of these kind of impulses that are leading the characters are actually come from quite dark places. And it's about that, the kind of, I guess I'm just really obsessed with fight of the ways in which we are these two selves, and we're constantly trying to like marry these like contradicting forces that sort of govern us and lead us and kind of dictate our decisions.
I love that inversion as well of the relationship between Harry and Leah, and that she's, explicitly disappointed in him that he doesn't have these impulses, and she asks him, have you ever thought about doing this? And he says, no, I'm content, and I'm in love, and it's a kind of masochism on her part. It's like, she's trying to destroy the good in that. Do you think that there's a feeling that she doesn't, that, I don't know, is it that she feels that she doesn't deserve that much goodness, or that it frightens her, or that there's something psychologically going on with her? And it's interesting how Harry deals with that, is by, rather than, continuing to be this good person, he's thinking, well, what can I do to, which in itself is just showing how good he is.
Exactly. It's like this, like,
help her.
It's like the sweetest kind of suggestion of an affair that could ever happen. But yeah, kind of. But I guess I slightly disagree with that whole notion of Leah not believing that she deserved. Well, I mean, it's partly true of her believing she is not deserving of goodness, but also that she is just so, that she acknowledges that she is drawn to darkness. Like even at the very beginning of the book, she is walking through the streets and imagining all these people dying. And it's this idea, like, she is a disaster tourist, and it's, she is drawn to, and that's, I guess, why the book kind of has it has its moments of melodrama, and why I loved writing all the sex scenes and stuff, and all of these kind of more larger, more dramatic kind of narrative moments in the book are all about presence. It's all about the fact that she's that she, at the beginning of the book, there's almost this feeling that Leah is kind of like a little bit bored. Like if we look at her life before the beginning of the book, like she's a little bit restless. She's there's how, and it's this idea that like we're drawn to dark things because they or things that might harm us. because they force us into the present moment, because they kind of, and I think in the book it even says that, like, you know, that's what kind of like tragedy does. It sort of robs us of you know, a past and a present, and we're kind of you know, empty of everything but time, and therefore entirely present. And I think that's kind of the thing that almost the motor that I have when I'm writing is this idea of, you know, because that's what writing is. It's sort of beating against this constant reflection, you know. It's trying to kind of capture memory, and in its attempt to, you know, to capture the presence of something, it fails, doesn't it? Because it's gone, the moment's gone, and we're constantly trying to chase it.
The moment's gone as soon as it arrives. Exactly.
And that's, I think all art is kind of about that, isn't it? It's about this mourning,
impossibly capturing a moment. And
it's like it's you know, desperately trying to capture something that will never be able to, you know, will never be captured fully, because life isn't art and art isn't life, you know. And I think that's why there's this idea of the first person in the book, the bold sections, kind of eroding and taking over, because it's, you know, it's really time. Like, you know, it's like this idea that creativity, an act of creation, is also an act of destruction, because it's there, it's captured it, it's done, and then it's, you know, it's failed. So I think that's why Leah is also is and I think, you know, Leah obviously feels the same way that I do, conveniently. And I think that's also why her relationship with Matthew is what it is, and why she goes back to it. Can
I ask you about that kind of in the, you know, in the idea of traditional romantic love, as opposed to the kind of family love or the love of God, which of course religion plays quite a big part of Leah's life, and her relationship with God as her witness, literally. But thinking about that kind of the other side of the love that appears in the book, and the romantic love, those aren't, I mean, no relationships are, but those aren't, again, they're not kind of traditionally, they're not there to kind of offer kind of lightness in this quite difficult terrain of illness. They are very real and very flawed and very kind of complex. And even this relationship between Harry and Leah, who have this, you know, this there's a lot of love between them, and it's a very kind of stable relationship. But of course, behind, on the other side of things, in the internal workings, it's all very complicated, and particularly Leah's feelings, as you've just demonstrated, are very complicated. But also the relationship, without wanting to kind of give away spoilers, but the relationship between Leah and Matthew, you know, it's not conventional start. And was that something that just happened naturally, kind of organically, or did you want, in your mind, if you were going to have the traditional kind of sense of romantic love happening in the book between two people in a kind of romantic sexual awakening kind of way, was it important to you that it not just be that you tell that story in a slightly different way? Because as a writer, you know, it's just not going to be perhaps as interesting, and you really do show the kind of the 360 of the character, and their kind of you know, motivations, essentially.
I think that the Matthew well, firstly, the Matthew sort of plot line, I guess, and his presence in the book is kind of inevitably tied to Leah's relationship with God, to this feeling that she is set apart from her family, and cannot access this thing that dictates their whole existence. So this kind of dancing around this absence I knew going in that I wanted that. But I think also it was just from a kind of writing perspective, it's the most fun, isn't it, to write romantic relationships, even the darkest ones and the kind of most twisted. I loved the returning to anything with Matthew. It was like, that was the those were there was a time where I was just spending so much time. There was like a period where I was spending so much time with them. And I kind of, I won't give any spoilers, but I was spending so much time with them, and I was
so difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. I was like, where is all this going? Why are we spending so much time with him? And then I realized why we were, which I won't say. So it's a reason to read if you haven't. But yeah, there are, I think the kind of the damage that these kind of great romantic relationships that are sort of fed to us in kind of popular culture and books, because that's and kind of classics and stuff, because I reference things like Wuthering Heights and Heathcliff, and those there's a very kind of intentional kind of like elusive parts of the book, that are really, that are kind of trying to take on these motifs and these tropes that we know, and then trying to sort of slightly
subvert them slightly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think that's and I think it's very aware that whole kind of part of the book, the slightly more kind of like gothic dark romance of them, being like out in the wild and like having sex around in the countryside or whatever. It was all me kind of trying to kind of work my way through the great kind of romantic literary canon and try and sort of decreate it a bit and interrogate how the mark that leaves on readers too. And there was a really interesting note actually, because I think Matthew was incredibly romanticized throughout the whole book. And then the Americans came in and were like, my American editor came in and was very kind of like, she's just really, there isn't a moment where where it all kind of falls into place. And it's, she's far too kind to this Matthew character. And I realized that actually I had fallen in love with Matthew throughout the course of writing it. And I was unable to just kind of look upon him like badly or in a kind of like pathetic light. And I realized that again, that was my problem, and it was all way too romanticized by the end. So I went back and had to kind of fall out of love with him through my writing and have that be something that the book was doing, intentionally. But again, that's what I loved about the whole process of this, is that you can have all these kind of like great ideas about the things that you want to sort of interrogate and untangle or whatever, but ultimately the characters just lead you in a certain way and you follow that, and then you have to look back at the whole thing and see where some have led you astray and some have like played tricks on you and some you're completely kind of in command of all the way through, and some run away from you, and I loved that about the Matthew plotline, because he did definitely sort of take command in the same way that he takes command over, the whole family, and arrives to the bridge. And there's that moment where Leah's kind of shocked that he can sort of comfort and command without having said a word to both Anne and Peter and her. Mm-hmm. And he did exactly the same thing to me. And so it was immensely satisfying getting to the end of the book and having that moment where it's like, there is I can't remember exactly the line, but it's realizing that, that a tragedy of a love like that, does not sustain a man through temporary periods of joy, and that like torture and kind of toxic love is not the only thing that makes like poets out of men or whatever. This idea that actually there is value and romance and drama in like underrated niceness and quiet comfort.
I think that's what I love about the fact that we meet Leah at that early point in her life, and then we meet her at that later point in her life, is that it's very quietly and subtly sort of teaching you about the different kinds of love and the different impacts that they have on you, on your you know, that those kind of rushes, that obsessional, lustful, and then how, you know, and you're not kind of, what you're not saying with these characters is this is a better kind of love because it's trustworthy and it's nice, and you're kind of saying this is the complicated way that people feel when they're presented with different kinds of love. And perhaps if your temperament is like Leah's, where you want something slightly more dangerous in life, that you might feel this way in this kind of safe environment.
Yeah, well, that's what's really, but I mean, also, I mean, because Leah's in some ways actually quite an unlikable character, and I kind of wanted that to be the case, but people speak of her like she's this kind of great saint and they love, and you know, but there's like this bit at the end when her and Matthew sort of have sex for the last time, and she sees him again after like 10 years of him going off after he left her in Italy or whatever. And, you know, he comes back kind of reformed, and he's like surprisingly peaceful. And there's none of that restless electric energy that he once had. And he's kind of happy and normal. And he's kind of found a way, you know, and they don't have, you know, there isn't that kind of dysfunction there anymore. And there's something kind of, and he's painted out through her eyes in this slightly pathetic way, like this idea that he's been knocked off this kind of like great mantelpiece next to like Heathcliff and all of the great, you know, romantic heroes of our time that are all dark and brooding, and he's kind of made his way through life and arrived as someone incredibly sort of normal and actually kind of underwhelming, and that's a great disappointment to her.
Yeah, that's it. And this kind of disappointment is kind of, it's another facet of their relationship, isn't it? Again, it's kind of, you know, what is this love? It's not, it's showing you every angle of that human experience.
Exactly. And that's why it was so important to me that there are like all these characters in the book have their internal characters. So they have Dove and Fossil or whatever. And that's what, you know, that's what Fossil is. That's what you know, at the end of the book, Leah has to sort of face Matthew's sort of shadow. But of course, Matthew's shadow is sort of her reconstruction of the man himself. And that's kind of what all of these internal kind of, you know, shadow characters or forms that, you know, as I like to call them, I guess, that's what they're there for. It's this idea that we kind of make for ourselves these people that are in our lives that come and go, and we remodel them, and we, you know, that they last forever in us as these constructions of truth, but never the thing itself, you know? And so when she gets her kind of romantic reconciliation, not in reality, but through fantasy, through this kind of tumbling out of what's going on in her body and memories. And yeah, I think that was really important, because I mean, I don't know. I feel like I imagine with any kind of like friendships, relationships or whatever, that people that are no longer in my life or whatever, I'm constantly constructing these kind of great epic scenes where we meet and certain things are said, you know, and they feel so real once you've played out those scenes in your brain, and you feel that you've kind of, it's enough. It's almost enough sometimes to just have these people that were once in our lives and have them, you know, in a kind of like, it's almost like a dreamlike state, to sort of force, you know, it's a kind of puppeting, isn't it? It's a sort of forcing them to say things and you get things off your chest. And it's weird how active our imagination, you know, can be, and how we can sort of reconcile things for ourselves. We just need to kind of project.
Thanks so much. I mean, it's just so lovely to talk about the book with you.
A huge thank you to Maddie and Laura for their time. If you have questions or want to get in touch, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Writers Centre, and you'll find us on Facebook by searching National Centre for Writing. Don't forget to sign up to our weekly newsletter by visiting nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk and clicking the orange drop-down box on the homepage.
As a UK registered charity, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to make our work possible. You can make a donation over on the website today by hitting the Support Us button in the top nav.
Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review us because it helps other writers to find the podcast.
Thanks again, keep writing, and we'll catch you on the next episode.